Hello again. Really sorry about that. We're back again. Very sorry for the technical issue. So what I was saying, apart from thanking everyone for being here and thanking Anna for presenting me, is that I changed the title and the topic of my presentation, hoping to once come back and maybe the names of these potential, of these people who would be a part of military prosopography, all starting with A. I think we will talk about them today, about Anatolius for sure, about Aspabetas a little bit probably. But as I said last week, I was participating in a wonderful workshop on migration and mobility at the Catholic University in Leuven. And the research I presented there brought me to this presentation. What I would like you to see, the topic is religious freedom, diplomacy, and cross-border mobility between Rome and Iran. And then I made this thing that Justo, rightly so probably, refused to do. From the 5th to the 6th century, I will offer you a sort of a comparison and a background of what we know for the 6th century, when we're probably a little bit, tiny bit more informed on these issues. And the main focus for me will be today this issue of religious freedom, this alleged or not alleged tolerance of religion, as tested and as guaranteed by diplomacy. Not in reality, as a matter of fact, was it really happening or not, because that's often a different issue when what is declared in diplomacy, but really from the point of view of international politics and diplomacy, and of course the cross-border mobility for our group, it's also always essential. So I will start with the situation in the 5th century and in the 420s, and then move on and try to reassess and represent you. And as a matter of fact, my interest is truly to profit from this workshop, also to ask some questions and to show you some pieces of text that I would invite you all to discuss together and get your feedback on that. So first, few words on the situation before the conflict of 421 and the situation of what little again we know about presence of the Zoroastrians in the Roman Empire. Because yes, as you will see and as you know, the alleged idea is that the treaty guaranteed freedom of religious for both religious, so to say, minorities, for the Zoroastrians in the Roman Empire and for the Christians in the Sasanian Empire. So what can we say about which of the categories? Much less, of course, on the Zoroastrians within the Roman Empire. In general, again, as everyone knows, the situation in the beginning of the 5th century between Rome and Iran is usually characterized as friendly, due to many reasons, which I think we will all today discuss in that or in one or other form. That is probably the presence at the power with young Theodosius II. It is the role of the Praetorian prefect of the East, Anthemius, who has been by scholarship often somehow connected his figure and these good relations with Persia due to different reasons, notably maybe some of his personal relations. He participated in an embassy with Marutha probably. Maybe I'm looking at Geoffrey Gretschreck's, also the presence of Antiochus, the prepositus curricularius at the court might have played some role, be a reflection of good relations, but also play some role in these good relations. And so in these times when Anthemius is still at power, we can say, and Theodosius is still young, there are attestations, or actually there is an attestation, evidence that exists, brought together. It's been in the focus of several scholars, notably of Kenneth Holland, who pointed out that the existence of that evidence that Romans reciprocated and responded to good relations with Persia in the times of Anthemius by tolerating fire cults on the Roman territory. Thus, and that's the specific evidence that we have for this time frame, because for earlier times we have more, of course, but for the early 5th century, the cult of Anahita, or Artemis Anaitis, or Persian Artemis, if we Hellenize it more and more, was apparently still practiced in the early 5th century in Asia Minor. An inscription on a statue base from a Lydian town of Hipaipa has been interpreted as evidence to confirm the statement. So there are inscriptions on two sides of the base of the statue honoring a proconsul of Asia. And then the third side, I'm sorry, it's really small here on our screen, but the third side mentions that the man responsible for erecting the monument was Apollonius Archimagos. And as Joseph Cale and Holland observed, the fact that an official of the fire cult expressed his thankfulness openly suggests that he and his co-religionists probably enjoyed official protection at this time. This Anahita sanctuary in Hipaipa was founded sometime before Alexander, and according to Mariana Rippel, who dedicated her article to the presence of evidence for Zoroastrian cults, and especially the cult of Anahita on the territory of the Roman Empire in the Roman times. So she noted that as similar cults in the area, it was only outwardly, and again I quote, and only superficially Hellenized. The cults, and you see this wonderful quotation from Pausanias, of course earlier, but a detailed description. And the cults continued to be practiced in the traditional manner with Persian priests, descendants of the Persian noble families settled in the region, chanting hymns that, according to Pausanias, were incomprehensible to the Greeks, from some sacred book over altars and with a burning fire. So let us come back to the inscription from Hipaipa, mentioning the priest of this cult. Interestingly, the proconsul of Asia, who was honored with this statue, his name was Anthemius Isidorus, and that was the son of our Anthemius, the prefect of the East. And so Kenneth Holland hypothesizes that there existed a strong antagonism between Anthemius and Pulcheria, Theodosius II's sister, who in 414 received the title of Augusta, and seems to be gaining more and more control over the official governments since these years. And it also seemed to correspond with the disappearance of Anthemius from the public politics, let's put it this way, and also of Antiochus, at least Antiochus. For him, it's rather an interruption, and about Anthemius, we don't really know. And here I refer you to, yes, the article by Jeffrey and by Jeffrey Gretrix and Jonathan Bardell about Antiochus. So the theory of Kenneth, it has been, there are many versions in the historiography whether really the disappearance of Anthemius was connected to the emergence and strengthening of Pulcheria's power. What Holm suggests are 2 points important for us, I think, here for the context. Under Anthemius, well, in these years, adepts of fire cults were tolerated and enjoyed official benevolence in Roman Empire. And the second point, it was seemingly no longer the case after 414 under the new Praetorian prefect Aurelian and with the increasing Pulcheria's influence. Then in his article about Pulcheria's crusade, he argues for maybe her major role in the Persian campaign. But for us, that's just the background for what preceded the conflict, and then the alleged, I think it actually existed, condition in the Treaty of the Mutual Tolerance. Yes, so that's a quotation from Kenneth Holland's article about role of Pulcheria here, and his argument would be that partly this deterioration of relations between Rome and Iran had some, well, it's hard to define what was at the origin of what, deterioration of relations that led also to the increased persecutions of the Christians in Iran, about which we will talk more today, or the other way around. We will talk about it. So, but we need to state, yes, that before the conflict of 421, the situation starts apparently being less friendly, also from the side of the Roman Empire towards Iran. Michael notably will talk more about this today. So, again, something about the situation before the conflict and Christians in Iran, and here specifically, I will not even go into details on that, because we will have today, yes, notably Michael's presentation that will be talking much more about that. And I think to the audience, some of these background events and situation are also familiar. So we have the time of concentration, congregation, yes, of the Persian Christian communities in Iran. We have these councils that happen. Probably there is some minor crisis in relations between the two empires in the 1780, which was the mission of Catholicos Yavalacha sent to Constantinople was probably to resolve some of these issues. For now, that doesn't seem major, however. And then starting from the year 20, we see a deterioration of relationships. Our Martyr Acts and other sources mention persecutions of the Christian communities going on in Iran. Again, I will not talk about before who were the converts, why the situation happened. Probably there's also a role of ascending of Bahram to power, but it's a separate subject for me. Is this topic of the fifth column. Dan has mentioned it today. Michael will also mention it. It's important for the background, the existence of texts that claim quite directly this sin threat coming from a potential alliance between the Christians in Iran and the Romans. But then what interests me in these events, here you see, thank you so much, Jeffrey and Samuel, for this collection, because it is so convenient and and helpful to use and to study. So you see the sources they talk about persecutions that start, different sources. We don't have time now to speak specifically. And mobility connected to these persecutions is also mentioned. Please notice that we have in Augustine, we have this evidence that some refugees that fled from Iran and reached Roman towns. We have Socrates Scholasticus, or in his ecclesiastical history, who describes quite in detail the events of the conflict. And what he mentions is that there were among those Christians in Persia those who, because of the oppression, fled to the Romans, and they were welcomed apparently by Atticus, the bishop, so this suppliance, the refugees were received in Constantinople, and they maybe were even, at least the events were made known, according to Socrates, to the Emperor Theodosius. And then more evidence coming from the text of Cyril of Scythopolis, who provides extremely interesting details on how the Iranian state here was acting to prevent the displacements, the across-the-border displacements, and this process of fleeing of the Christians, about whom we hear also from other sources. So I quote, Phylarchs was of the Saracens were stationed at all points on the roads, so that none of the Christians in Persia might escape to the Romans. I think this is very interesting. For the Roman Empire, we have some very fragmentary, as a matter of fact, not detailed, but we have some evidence that, notably in Ammianus, so for earlier time, that forces that were supposed to guard the frontier against potential threat of an invasion, milites stationarii, for example, they could have had also functions of controlling and preventing the outgoing mobility. And I think we have something of a similar here as described and mentioned rather by Cyril. So the use of the Arab allies of the Persians here close to the frontier and on the road, coming back to the topic of the roads, to prevent them from going away and joining the Romans. And then he goes on with more details, which he has, Cyril, because this evidence, and that's also very important, it's an independent tradition from other sources for all the events of this war, and that's quite important for us, because Cyril of Scythopolis was personally acquainted with the son of the Phylarch, who was, well, in the middle of all these events after they moved aside. And so Cyril interviewed him, and we see here something that was probably part of their family history. Might be very biased and has other problems in it, but it's an independent piece of evidence. And so Aspabetus, who was a Phylarch of these Arabs, once Khodadad, I hope you're there, will make that article on him and on why he's Aspabetus. Observing I quote, the harshness and inhumanity of the Magi in the city towards the Christians, felt compassion And so he didn't prevent some of the Christians from fleeing, but rather the opposite. He cooperated with them, moved by sympathy. So apparently he helped them, and himself, he did the same thing. Because he was that these acts became known apparently to the king, he decided to flee, to switch sides himself with his family, moved on the Roman side. Then there are some problems about who exactly was that person who welcomed him. Was that Anatolius or not Anatolius, some other Magistra Militum? Again, we'll discuss it elsewhere, but a very important and interesting evidence, I think. And the last one regarding this mobility, we in Socrates have the mention that Persians wanted them back. There was an embassy before the hostilities, apparently, the military hostilities, that demanded that the refugees be returned. Quite often, very typical demand for diplomatic negotiations in late antiquity between almost all the partners. Standard and recurrent, however, it is usually made when refugees were of particular importance. In numbers, they were rather tribes than just individual refugees, or in position, or in their political role, like, for example, in the Caucasus. So that the request would be made. And I think here, these were really important and big people, and maybe also then you will tell me, maybe also the Armenian situation was somehow hinted here. And according to Socrates, the Romans refused to hand the fugitives back, and that was also actually the cause, and that started the war. All right, so the war, I don't speak about it, and I come immediately to the topic of the peace. The situation after the peace was concluded in 422. And we often, as you all have read about this conflict, I'm sure, in historiography, we often encounter the statement that both Christians in Iran and Zoroastrians in the Roman Empire received protection and guarantees of tolerance by this peace treaty. However, quite often in historiography, it is just one scholar refers to another, to another, to another. There are few in detail discussions of what is the evidence that we have for that. And I think it's really, for me, a side note and some of the questions that might rise when we look at the evidence for that. And I do believe, actually, and I will anticipate that happened, that they were both of these conditions. But let us critically still look at the evidence, because I think that though the conclusion is the same, but it's still not good, because in historiography, we see accumulation of some misinterpretations of sources regarding this mutual religious tolerance. So the first group of evidence tell us that in the result, it's a very general thing, that in the results of the end of the war, so the war ended, and implicitly, but not explicitly, implicitly, because the peace was concluded, persecution of the Persian Christians stopped. So we have many sources telling us that they stopped. Then what do we have more specific? And so here we are coming to my question to my dear colleagues who are specialists in Syriac sources and Syriac texts. We have the evidence from the Chronicle of Arbela. And again, leaving aside, and you will tell me, but I think now we can leave aside the question of its not unauthenticity and stay with the concept of its authenticity and just analyze it. And so there are different translations that we have of this passage. The historical translation by Ingana, the following English one that follows is the same, basically saying that both sides agreed to allow absolute freedom of religion in their countries. Schreier, with his added commentary here, both parties agreed to give their territories complete liberty in the matter of religion. And he adds that this affirms the thesis that both parties to the treaty agreed to tolerate each other religions in their own territories. All right. So here is the text, and I'll follow it once again with some literate word-to-word maybe translation. Yes. So what we say, so in that war, the war was before, was agreed, yes, that two sides, then follows the word freedom, and this freedom is full, right? Bear with me, please, and help me, those who are the true Syriac scholars. And so they should give, they will give, yes, and that's the tricky one. In their lands, right? In their lands, so it's plural, and that's one of my questions and problems regarding, about, concern, and metul. And then there is Haimanuta. And so, as you see, it has been translated as in religion. Religion. This is my question. As far as I understand, and I would really appreciate your reactions on that, Haimanuta is not a neutral term to say any religion. Would it be used by an East Syriac source to refer to the Magi, to refer to Zoroastrianism? Well, we will discuss it further, but I'll just put now you this problem. Is it not a true religion, which is, as I put it in the brackets here, the Christian faith that is intended? And I think there is some contradiction. Notably, the contradiction is between the plural, maybe, because it is still in their lands, but it still, for me, that would rather be about the situation going on in Iran for Christian communities in the lands in Iran, which does not mean that there did not exist a reciprocation for Zoroastrian, but that this type of a source and a Christian Syriac source would probably not put it here and not use the good religion, the true religion word for it. So just as a matter of a commentary. And then we have the other evidence, which is more known, I would say, the reference and the evidence by Priscus of Panium, 5th century author, who wrote a lot on diplomacy. And so he describing the situation much later, probably according to Blockley, already of the things happening in the 60s of the 5th century. He mentions an embassy coming to Constantinople from Iran, complaining. They complained, I read it, to the Romans, both about those of their people who were fleeing to them, the Romans, so again, this mobility, and about the Magi, who had lived from old in Roman territory. The Romans, wishing to turn the Magi from their ancestral custom, laws, and rites of worship, harassed them and did not allow the fire, which they called unquenchable, to be kept burning continually, according to their law. And then, interestingly, the Romans do not reply with, why should they be tolerated in our Christian empire? They answer with the promise to send envoys to discuss the issues, and with the negation of this fact, with the claim that there are no fugitives, and no, the Zoroastrians of the Magi are not being harassed on account of their religion, And I think rightly so, this evidence has often been interpreted as, it demonstrates that an agreement must have existed so that the Persian side could allege to it and say, well, you don't really behave according to this agreement. And the Romans reply in the same manner, because they say, well, no, actually, we don't do anything wrong. We do everything according to the treaty. So they probably did all these things, but they don't acknowledge it. And that's diplomatically important. And as I said, it's just diplomacy that interests me here. And then I know I'm approaching the end of times. I mean, my times, my time, but just a few points as the background, rather not drawbacks, but step forwards into the 6th century. So for the 6th century, we have this very, very famous evidence by Menander the Guardsman in the context of his very detailed description and work quotation, citation, but basically of the peace treaty concluded between the Romans and the Persians in 562. And famously, there is a separate article, probably an appendix, as suggested Blockley, and I think it's absolutely correct, which says, separate consideration of the status of Christians in Persia. It was agreed that they could build churches and worship without fear and sing their hymns and praise unhindered, as has been our custom. Furthermore, they will not be compelled to take part in the Magian worship, nor against their will to pray to the gods revered by the Mass. So the non-harassment of the Christians in Iran and in Zoroastrian surroundings. For their parts, and I think here we also have some misinterpretations in historiography, the Christians would not venture to convert the Magians to our beliefs. It was also agreed that the Christians would be permitted to bury their dead in graves, as has been our custom. So this phrase that I put, you don't maybe see it in a little bit different shadow of green, Christians would not venture to convert the Magians to our belief, has often been taken by scholars as an evidence that in Menander we have the statement that Zoroastrians were to be tolerated on the Roman territory according to the peace treaty. I think it is wrong. I think here what we have, this whole passage speaks about what's happening in Iran, as it actually states separate consideration of the status of Christians in Persia. And it goes back to the questions of the Christians that would be, by the way, even permitted to bury their dead in graves and so on. I think this is something, and those who are well acquainted with Syriac historiography will probably recognize, this is something about this Christian zeal of aggression towards the representatives of the Zoroastrian religion in Iranian territories, probably on the territories where there were big and powerful Christian communities. And we know such cases, yes, when temples were attacked, among the causes, allegedly, of the war of 521. So I think what Menander says here, just textologically, is everything about the situation of Christians in Iran. But that is not to say, again, that there was no reciprocation. I think there was, but it's not in Menander. It's strange that it's not Menander. I admit that it is strange because it's not a biased chronicle, and it seems to have, but still, I think these conditions about peace tolerance, about tolerance of other religions, they seem to always be in not in the main part of the treaty, but in appendices, and they were probably not very much publicized and discussed, and so on and so forth. So maybe that is why Menander doesn't really put it here. That's again the same text. But the last point, we have Tabari. And Tabari, in the part where he speak already about Khusro II Parvez, he and about his agreement about toleration of the Christian religion, he makes an allusion to the times of Khusro I and says, those of his, just a second, to adopt this. In this connection, he adduced the fact that Anushirvan, Khosrow Anushirvan, had made a peace agreement with Caesar regarding the tributes that he exalted from the Byzantine ruler, and he stipulated that those of his compatriots, meaning Zoroastrian, who were in the Byzantine ruler's land should be kindly treated, and that the monarch should build fire temples for them in his lands. Caesar, in his part, had made a similar stipulation in regard to the Christians. So here I think we have the survived evidence of this both reciprocated part, and he probably alleges to the same peace treaty between Khusro and Justinian. That must be that, because almost absolutely certain general protection for religious communities was not a part of the endless peace treaty of 532. What I claim, but that's published, so I will not talk about it. What I claim, what was a part of the peace treaty of 532 were mutual agreements on tolerance of individuals, religious tolerance of individuals' faith, meaning the famous 7 philosophers who were coming back to the Roman Empire, and we have the evidence by Agathias saying that Khosrow insisted that they were not to be harassed once back, and the East Syriac martyrdom of Margrigar, which I suggest to compare with the evidence about the philosophers. And so the Syriac text tells us that this Christian Margrigar was also under the protection of this appendix about religious tolerance when he was given back, he was taken captive and then given back to the Persian Empire. So to finish, I think that, well, as I promised, nothing revolutionary. I really just tried to revise the same texts that are known, but I think adding a little bit more of the clarity of what is in the sources. And as a matter of fact, the result of it is that every time we have the balance and we have the equilibrium in the agreements regarding the tolerance to, so to say, religious minorities in the two empires. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ekaterina. Well, now we have actually 4 minutes for discussion, but I hope that maybe we could steal some 5 minutes from a coffee break, so that won't be a big problem. While you were talking, we received a request from Amir, who said, after your presentation, could you quickly revisit the translation table? Now, I wonder whether Amir would like to come up and clarify his suggestion.
There is an extra,
yeah,
the one in the beginning from Socrates' text describing the community in Libya. So,
okay, there was Pausanias.
Pausanias, yes.
okay,
Exactly.
yes.
Right.
Do you have any questions? Oh, yeah, Amir, go on.
Oh, fantastic. Could you zoom into that a little bit? It's a little bit unclear. No, the
I
one
think
before that one.
Amir, we have a strong echo coming from you. Probably you have two
Oh.
devices on which you have this going on.
Sorry, let me just check.
But I have put the slide, Pausanias' slide, and I'm happy to send you then the reference.
Right. It's actually not this one. It's the one where you have the small map with Lydia. With
the inscription, okay.
Yes, this one. It's unfortunately a little bit unclear. Would you mind sending this to me?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, with the article, yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, good. Do we have any questions in the audience? Yeah, Jack, go on.
Thank you, Ekaterina. That's fascinating. I can see when you look at the text closely, like you do, this idea that it could be just referring to the Christians in Iran who were known in one of the factors leading up to the war is the provocations. This is in Theodoret, isn't it? And a rather zealous sort of proselytism that leads to trouble. What I wonder if do we have a parallel with the treaties that are said to exist about mutual aid between the two sides? Because thinking of your Priscus excerpt to do with the episode,
Yes, yes.
you can put it up again. The Romans sort of agreed to talk about it, and then they'll send, as I recall, another part of maybe this same embassy, and certainly around then, and we find it in other sources as well, is the idea the Persians say, you need to give us money or military support to defend the Darial Pass or whatever it is. And Joshua the Stylite and other sources refer to this, and Malalas, as I recall, as well. The idea that they say there is a mutual aid treaty between the two, but it is only ever the Persians who get anything from this. And so what I'm wondering is, in a way, the idea, there's hardly any Zoroastrians in Roman territory. Again, there's a sort of a lack of equilibrium here. Is it could there be something that looks just like the mutual aid sounds great? It's just it all goes in one direction. So the religious one equally seems to also go in one direction.
That's why I think, thank you so much, Jeffrey. I think that's brilliant question. And that's the difference. And that's why I stressed so much that I talk about diplomacy, because diplomacy has its rules that are different from reality. And for example, so I think that this equilibrium and reciprocity for a reason, and with the payments for the passes, that's even maybe more visible somehow. Well, it's also a problem because the Romans are trying by all means to go around accepting that they are paying the Persians, because otherwise propagandistically that's really not a good move, while the Iranian side does exactly the opposite, but using absolutely the same image. They are our tributaries. But that's propaganda, and then there is a real situation, and diplomacy needs this reciprocation. For in the case that's in this small case study that I did on the philosophers and Margrigor, why I insist, for example, on this idea that the two cases were connected, and then within this peace treaty we have suddenly, it was strange, I think, before in Agathias, just this unilateral idea about protection of the philosophers wanted by Khosrow, apparently granted because otherwise the treaty would not be concluded. And then this Syriac text that mentions to us exactly the same peace treaty, and in other words, but says that, the Christian convert, must be, again, there is even an allusion and a mention of a treaty, must be protected. I don't think Justinian really wanted so much to have, and I think there were also extradition demands, and they were made by Justinian for the sake of equilibrium, because I think that once they negotiated and started to negotiate the peace treaty, as a rule, always, that gives the permission to claim all those who ran away or were taken captives. Pirangushnas was a very big shot in the Sasanian world, an important general whom, for reasons of loyalty or other reasons, Khosrow did want back. So he demanded him. Probably Justinian made this allegation, that's my reconstruction, of course, it's very hypothetical, about the religious protection, which was then, for the rules of diplomacy, reciprocated for the philosophers, and Justinian again demanded to send him the philosophers for whom I don't think he cared, but just to claim them back, because that would give, even in this appendix, the apparent symmetry to how the diplomacy looked like. So that's the third dimension, I think, how these treaties work.
Just by the way, I know Amir wants to come in, just on these diplomatic things, that recent book by Andres
Oh yeah,
is quite useful.
yeah.
Going up to 560.
In the brotherhood.
So thank you very much, both Ekaterina and Jeffrey. Now we have a commentary from Amir. If you can keep it short, please, because we're out of time.
Yeah, it's just a small thing. In regards to the one-sidedness, in terms of who's actually getting the money and who's doing most of the protecting, there's an easy geographic answer. Once you're past the Darial Gorge, it's actually much easier to go straight to the west, where you have the plains of Lazica. And this is, of course, quite difficult to defend against horsemen, especially from Huns once they get access to it. This is also why the Romans were so keen in sort of bribing, cooperating with the Persians to have this gate sealed at all times. So there is a very easy geographic answer, and unfortunately, geography is not made equally.
Okay.
Thank you for the comments. For the future, you're really echoing it's very hard to understand what's happening. So try.
I gotta throw away this thing. It's garbage. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you, Ekaterina.